The winter night was unusually harsh in downtown Seattle, with temperatures dropping to a bone-chilling 15 degrees. James Chen's fingers were stiff on the steering wheel of his Tesla Model S as he navigated the empty streets, eager to get home after a grueling 14-hour day at his tech company. The dashboard clock showed 11:43 p.m., and the only sound was the gentle hum of the car's heating system and the occasional crunch of snow under his tires. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror, cutting through the darkness. James checked his speedometer. He was barely 5 miles over the limit. With a tired sigh, he pulled over into a deserted parking lot, the neon signs of closed shops casting an eerie glow around him. The crunch of boots on fresh snow announced the approach of 2 officers, their flashlights beam dancing across his side mirror. Officer Thompson, a stocky man with a crew cut and a face hardened by years on the force, tapped on the window with his knuckles. His partner, Officer Rivera, stood slightly behind, hand resting casually on his holster. James lowered his window, and a blast of Arctic air rushed in, making him shiver in his expensive but thin suit jacket. "License and registration," Thompson barked, his breath visible in the freezing air. As James reached for his documents, he noticed something off about the officer's demeanor, a hint of amusement in their eyes, as if they were sharing a private joke. He handed over his papers, watching as Thompson studied them with exaggerated slowness. "Mr. Chen," Thompson drawled, drawing out each syllable, "do you know why we pulled you over tonight?" Before James could answer, Rivera chimed in. "Bet a fancy car like this means you think you own the road, huh?" Something in their tone made James's military-trained instincts kick in. He remained silent, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel, just as he learned during his years in the Marines. But these officers weren't interested in standard procedure tonight. Thompson handed the documents back with a smirk that sent a chill down James's spine, one that had nothing to do with the weather. "Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Chen," Thompson ordered, already reaching for his phone. Rivera mirrored the action, a grin spreading across his face. As James carefully opened his door, snowflakes settled on his shoulders, and he could see his breath forming clouds in the harsh beam of the cruiser's headlights. He had no idea that the next few minutes would change not just his night, but the entire city's approach to law enforcement. The parking lot's security camera silently recorded everything that was about to unfold, its red light blinking steadily in the winter night. What these officers didn't know was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, and the man they were about to humiliate would soon hold their futures in his hands. "Get down on the ground," Officer Thompson commanded, his voice carrying a hint of cruel amusement. The icy pavement glistened under the streetlights as James Chen stood there, his expensive Italian leather shoes already soaking through from the snow. Officer Rivera pulled out his phone, the camera app already open, a smirk playing across his face. "Since you like breaking the law, Mr. Hotshot, let's see how you handle some good old-fashioned discipline." Thompson sneered. 20 push-ups. Right here, right now." The temperature had dropped another degree, and James could feel the cold biting through his tailored suit jacket. James looked around the empty parking lot, where nothing moved except the swirling snowflakes caught in the patrol car's headlights. His mind raced through various scenarios, years of Marine Corps training warning with his current position as a respected executive. He could refuse, he could argue, he could even call for help, but something in his gut told him to wait and watch. "What's the matter, rich boy?" Rivera taunted, starting to record. "Too precious to get your suit dirty." The officer's phone light cast harsh shadows across the scene, making everything look more sinister. James slowly lowered himself to the ground, his palms pressing against the freezing pavement. 1 push-up, the cold bit into his hands like needles. 2 push-ups. Ice crystals formed on his sleeve cuffs. 3 push-ups. The officer's laughter echoed off the surrounding buildings. 4 push-ups. Snow began soaking through his knees. "Look at this," Thompson called out to his partner. "Got ourselves a real tough guy here." They didn't notice how smoothly James executed each movement, his form perfect despite the adverse conditions. They missed the controlled breathing, the steady pace, telltale signs of military training. As James continued, memories of boot camp flashed through his mind. This was nothing compared to what he'd endured at Paris Island. But what infuriated him wasn't the physical challenge. It was the gross abuse of power playing out in real time. The officers kept filming, adding commentary like sports announcers at a game. "Getting tired yet? Big shot," Rivera called out. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before speeding in our town." They were so caught up in their power trip that they failed to notice James carefully observing their name tags, memorizing their badge numbers, and noting every word they said. By the time James completed the 20th push-up, his suit was ruined, but his dignity remained intact. He stood up slowly, brushing snow from his knees, his face betraying nothing of the calculated thoughts running through his mind. The officers, satisfied with their show of authority, finally wrote him a ticket and sent him on his way. Little did they know that their moment of cruel entertainment would come back to haunt them in less than 12 hours. As James drove away, he wasn't thinking about his wet clothes or his wounded pride. He was thinking about tomorrow's city council meeting, where he would be introduced as the new head of the Police Oversight Committee. James Chen sat silently in his car for several minutes after the officers left, his clothes slowly drying in the heated seats. His mind wasn't on the humiliation he'd just endured. It was on the calculated precision with which he'd handled it. Each push-up had been a conscious decision, every silent moment a strategic choice. During his 8 years in the Marine Corps, James had learned that true power wasn't in immediate reaction, but in patient response. As water dripped from his suit onto the leather seats, he pulled out his phone and checked his car's dashboard camera. Perfect. Everything had been recorded in crystal clear quality, from the moment the officers approached to their final sneering comments. While most people saw James as just another successful tech executive, few knew about his military background. He'd served in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable, where temperatures made tonight's frost feel like a spring day. Those officers had no idea that their punishment was nothing compared to the training exercises he'd led as a Marine Corps captain. James began methodically documenting everything while it was fresh in his mind. Badge numbers: 4587 and 4392. Names: Thompson and Rivera. Time: 11:43 p.m. to 12:07 a.m. Location: Northwest Plaza parking lot. He'd noticed Thompson's body cam was turned off, another detail that would prove crucial later. As he drove home, his mind wandered to tomorrow's city council meeting. He'd been keeping his new appointment as Police Oversight Committee head quiet, planning to make changes gradually. But these officers had just handed him the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why reform was desperately needed. Opening his garage door, James smiled slightly at the irony. Those officers thought they were dealing with a soft executive who'd crumble under pressure. Instead, they targeted someone who had spent years training others to endure far worse conditions. Someone who understood both physical endurance and systemic change. In his home office, James connected his car's camera to his computer and began downloading the footage. The video was even clearer than he'd hoped. Their faces, their badges, their arrogant laughter, all perfectly captured. He spent the next hour preparing his presentation for tomorrow's meeting, carefully editing the video to highlight the most egregious moments of abuse. As he finally went to bed at 2 a.m., James felt no anger, no resentment. Instead, he felt a familiar sense of purpose, the same he'd felt leading missions in the Marines. Tomorrow wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about transformation. These officers had unknowingly provided him with exactly what he needed to push for meaningful change in the department. The last thought that crossed his mind before sleep was that sometimes the best response to abuse of power isn't to fight back immediately, but to wait for the perfect moment to create lasting change. The city council chamber buzzed with its usual morning energy. Officers Thompson and Rivera stood at their usual posts, expecting another routine budget meeting. Neither noticed James Chen quietly entering through the side door, his laptop tucked under his arm, looking immaculate in a fresh suit that gave no hint of last night's ordeal. Mayor Harrison called the meeting to order, her gavel echoing through the wood-paneled room. "Before we discuss the budget," she announced, "I'd like to introduce our new Police Oversight Committee head. Many of you know him as the CEO of Chintech Solutions, but today he begins his public service role." The color drained from Officer Thompson's face as James Chen stood up. Rivera's hand, which had been casually resting on his belt, suddenly dropped to his side. The confidence they'd shown last night evaporated as they realized who they'd forced to do push-ups in the freezing cold. "Thank you, Mayor Harrison," James began, his voice steady and professional. "I wasn't planning to make any major announcements today, but recent events have highlighted urgent issues we need to address." He opened his laptop, connecting it to the chamber's presentation system. The large screen behind the council members flickered to life. "Last night, I had a fascinating interaction with two of our officers," James continued, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Rather than tell you about it, I think it's better if I showed you." The crystal-clear footage from his car's dashboard camera filled the screen. The council chamber fell silent as they watched the events unfold. The unnecessary stop, the cruel taunts, the abuse of power played out in high definition. The audio captured every snide comment, every laugh, every moment of humiliation attempted by the officers. When the video ended, Mayor Harrison's face had hardened into a mask of controlled anger. Several council members were furiously scribbling notes, and Officers Thompson and Rivera stood frozen, their earlier swagger replaced by the dawning realization that their careers hung by a thread. "This incident," James continued, his voice now carrying the authority of his Marine Corps days, "is not just about one traffic stop or two officers. It's about a culture that needs to change." He turned to face Thompson and Rivera directly for the first time since entering the chamber. "And change begins today." The silence in the room was deafening. In just 10 minutes, the routine budget meeting had transformed into a watershed moment for the city's police department. And it was clear to everyone present that James Chen was not just another bureaucrat. He was someone who knew exactly how to turn humiliation into reform. The once quiet council chamber erupted into a storm of voices as James Chen played the full dashcam footage. Mayor Harrison repeatedly banged her gavel, trying to restore order. Council members half rose from their seats, pointing and gesturing at Officers Thompson and Rivera, who seemed to shrink with each passing second of the video. "Let's examine this footage frame by frame," James said, his calm voice cutting through the chaos. He paused the video at key moments, when Thompson switched off his body camera, when Rivera started recording on his phone, when both officers laughed as James performed push-ups in the freezing cold. Police Chief Davis, a veteran of 30 years on the force, sat with his jaw clenched. His department had been under scrutiny before, but never with such damning evidence. The timestamps on the video were clear, the audio crisp, and there was no way to deny what had happened. "Notice," James continued, highlighting a particular segment, "that at no point was I informed of my actual violation. No breathalyzer was offered, no field sobriety test conducted. Instead, these officers decided to conduct their own form of street justice." His words hung heavy in the air, making several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Thompson finally found his voice. "Sir, we were just." But James cut him off with a raised hand. "Officer Thompson, I believe you've done enough talking. The video speaks for itself." The authority in his voice, honed by years of military command, made Thompson step back instinctively. Rivera's phone, the same one he'd used to record his amusement the night before, now sat silent in his pocket. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very technology they used to humiliate a citizen was now being used to expose their misconduct. As the final seconds of the video played, showing James driving away in his snow-covered Tesla, the room fell into a stunned silence. The abuse of power was clear, but what struck everyone even harder was the calculated patience of the man they tried to humiliate. A man who'd said nothing, done exactly as they demanded, all while knowing he held the power to end their careers. Minutes after the video ended, James Chen was already pulling up files on the chamber's main screen. This incident led me to conduct an overnight investigation into Officers Thompson and Rivera's service records, he announced, his fingers moving swiftly across his laptop. The documents that appeared told a disturbing story. Complaint after complaint filled the screen, all buried, dismissed, or marked as resolved without investigation. There were 12 similar incidents in the past year alone. Citizens forced to perform humiliating acts during routine traffic stops, all conveniently missing from official body camera footage. A delivery driver made to sing the national anthem in the rain. A college student forced to hop on one leg while reciting the alphabet backward. A grandmother told to dance to avoid a ticket. James read from the complaints. Each case had been systematically buried under paperwork and bureaucracy. Police Chief Davis's face grew redder with each revelation. These weren't just isolated incidents. They showed a pattern of behavior that had somehow slipped through the cracks of his department's oversight. Or perhaps, more disturbingly, they hadn't slipped through at all. What's most concerning, James continued, pulling up more files, is how these complaints were handled. Notice the signature at the bottom of each dismissal. He zoomed in on a section of the document. Several council members gasped as they recognized the name of a high-ranking police administrator. Thompson and Rivera stood rooted to their spots, watching their years of unchecked behavior unfold before the entire city council. The small kingdom of fear they'd built through intimidation and humiliation was crumbling under the weight of meticulous documentation. The dashcam footage from my car last night wasn't just about my experience, James explained, his voice firm but measured. It was the key that unlocked this entire pattern of abuse. And now we have an opportunity. No, an obligation, to ensure it never happens again. Within 24 hours, the police department underwent its biggest transformation in decades. James Chen stood in the same parking lot where he'd done push-ups, but now he was surrounded by news crews and city officials. The morning frost sparkled under the camera lights as he announced the sweeping changes. Officers Thompson and Rivera had been immediately suspended, their badges and service weapons surrendered. But James wasn't satisfied with just punishing 2 officers. His experience had exposed a deeper rot in the system, and he was determined to cut it out completely. Effective immediately, he announced to the gathered crowd, every patrol car will be equipped with AI-enhanced dashboard cameras that cannot be turned off during stops. Body cameras will now upload footage directly to a secure server, preventing any tampering or convenient malfunctions. The reporter's pen scratched frantically across notepads as he continued. The high-ranking administrator who had buried the complaints was escorted from police headquarters that same afternoon, carrying a cardboard box of personal items. 3 other supervisors who had enabled the abuse of power were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. But the most significant change came in the form of a new oversight system. James implemented a civilian review board, composed of community members from all walks of life. Every complaint would now be investigated independently, with no involvement from the police department's internal affairs division. Last night, I could have fought back, James told the assembled crowd. I could have revealed my identity immediately. But sometimes, the best way to fix a broken system is to experience its failures firsthand. The morning sun caught the Marine Corps pin on his lapel, a subtle reminder of the discipline and strategy he'd brought to this role. As the press conference ended, a young officer approached James. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted you to know. Many of us have wanted to report these abuses for years, but we were afraid. Thank you for giving us our integrity back." The story made national headlines. The push-ups that pushed reform. But for James Chen, it wasn't about the publicity. It was about transforming a moment of humiliation into lasting change, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's reform.